Welcome back, my friends. I had a request for this one. If you like these stories, please share and repost, as it will help a lot. Anyways, today's story is called The Wulver, a Scottish werewolf, the unveiling. In the remote, wind-whipped highlands of Scotland, where the fog rolls in like an ocean tide, and the land is gloriously painted in hues of emerald and granite, there exists a legend as ancient as the stones themselves. This is the legend of the Wulver, a creature wrapped in superstition and folklore, a chilling amalgamation of man and wolf, haunting the nightmares of those who dare tread its territory. Our tale unfolds with a young shepherd boy named Angus McLoud, a lad of only 17 summers. With his shepherd's crook and faithful collie, he guards his flock from the dangers of the wild, his livelihood dependent on the woolly creatures. It was the eve of Beltane's Eve, a date marked with celebration and ritual, but for Angus, it was to be a night of terror. In the year of 1875, a tempest had seized the highlands, turning the sky into an inky abyss, punctuated by blazes of lightning. Rain lashed against Angus's oilskin cloak as he patrolled the slopes of Beinn Doraenach, a towering sentinel against the stormy backdrop. Suddenly his collie began to whimper, its ears flattened against its skull, as a low growl echoed through the howling wind. Angus squinted into the darkness, and his blood ran cold when he saw it. A creature emerged, its silhouette a monstrous distortion of man and beast. It prowled on the cusp of the shadow and light, its eyes glowing like dying embers in the heart of the storm. Its body appeared grotesquely human yet bestial, and from its jowls it released a howl that seemed to claw at Angus's very soul. Fear seized Angus, a paralyzing chill that held him captive. He wanted to run, to flee from this ever-growing nightmare before him, but his legs refused to obey. He was frozen in fear. He could only watch as the Wulver studied him, its lupine gaze dissecting him before it slipped back into the cloak of fog and shadows. The storm raged on, but to Angus, the world had become eerily silent. The fear was intense, causing his heart to strangely beat like a drum, the only reminder that he was still alive and not entrapped in some hellish nightmare. The Wulver was real, and it had marked him. Little did he know this was just the beginning of his terrifying ordeal. The encounter with the Wulver branded Angus's life with an indelible mark of dread. The once jovial shepherd boy, known for his infectious laughter and charming tales, transformed into a reclusive, nervous shell. He was rarely seen in the local tavern, and when he was, he would sit alone, his gaze distant, always appearing to be lost in thought. His once bright eyes were now clouded with fear, and his lips sealed with a secret he dared not share. His flock, once thriving and healthy, sadly began to dwindle. One by one, his sheep began to disappear, each loss deepening the creases on Angus's face. He blamed it on the Wulver, the haunting figure from his nightmares that had bled into his reality. The villagers, however, could only see a boy deeply sinking into madness, thinking that he himself may be going crazy. Whispers floated around the village, carried by the wind. Mad Angus saw the devil. Yet, a pattern began to emerge, a curious correlation that could not be ignored. When Angus was absent, perhaps visiting a neighboring village or helping his sickly mother, the disappearances ceased. A hushed awe descended upon the villagers. What kind of price had Angus paid for this temporary reprieve? Had he struck a deal with the very beast itself? The line between fear and reverence blurred as the mystery deepened. As winter set in, the village was blanketed in a sheet of virgin snow, a deceptive beauty that masked the chilling fear that gripped its inhabitants. The sheep, their fluffy wool coats thickened against the cold, were now more valuable than ever. Angus, despite his fear, had a duty to fulfill. On a particularly brutal winter's day, Angus ventured into the woods, his breath crystallizing in the frosty air. He sought to hunt for game, to provide for his family and his village. But he was not the only hunter that day. In the silent forest, the Wulver was also out hunting, and sadly it had found him. It emerged from the thickets, its fur dusted with snow, its eyes burning with a strange intelligence like he'd never seen on any beast before. It offered a deal, a chilling exchange, human flesh in return for the safety of his sheep. Before Angus could respond, the sound of a distant hunting horn echoed through the trees. The men of the village had found their quarry, a stag, and it lay butchered before them. But Angus was missing. His absence sparked a new wave of fear. Had Angus struck a deal with the devil? Had he sold his soul for a temporary peace? The village was left to ponder as the snow continued to fall, each flake a silent testament to their intensifying fear. As the days lengthened and the grip of winter loosened, the villagers grew restless. Angus was anxiously needed. It was shearing season, and his skills were unmatched. The uncanny silence from the hills, the absence of the young shepherd, was deafening. Then one day, out of nowhere, Angus made his return. He was a spectre of his former self, his face gaunt, his eyes haunted. In his arms he carried a lamb, its body marred with grievous wounds. The villagers gasped at the sight. Their fear rekindled. Their greatest fear was real. The Wulver had returned. A collective decision was made. They could not live under the shadow of the beast. A hunt would be organized, a desperate attempt to rid their land of the monstrous predator. As the sun set, the men of the village prepared their weapons. Their hair stood on end, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. But as the moon rose, the horrid screams echoed from the hills. The villagers had never experienced a chill like they were experiencing right now. The Wulver had made its move. The hunters of the Wulver had they themselves become the hunted. The real terror was about to begin. Under the spectral glow of the moon, the village men gathered, their faces etched with grim determination. Each held a weapon, from pitchforks to hunting rifles, their hands steady despite the fear gnawing at their very souls. They had one mission: to hunt down the Wulver, the beast that had cast a shadow of terror on their lives. The night was eerily silent, not a single sound, the usually vocal wildlife muted, as if aware of the deadly game unfolding. The men moved, as one, their lanterns casting long, dancing shadows on the frost-kissed ground as they ventured into the depths of the wilderness. The hunters became the hunted, when the first horrid screams echoed through the hills. It was a sound no man could ever forget, a symphony of fear and agony that chilled them to their very core. They found one of their own, a farmer named Euwan. He was a great man. He was known for his pure strength. He was the strongest of the village. This is where the villagers had even more fear. Euwan's body was found torn and lifeless, his eyes wide with terror even in death. The Wulver had struck, the villagers speaking amongst themselves. How can this be? Their panicky fear turned into rage. The men pushed forward. They would not let Euwan's death be in vain. They would not let the beast continue its reign of terror. The hunt was on. The village was a ghost town, its inhabitants locked behind doors, all of them hiding in fear as they awaited news from the hunt. Angus sat alone in his home. While confused, he was deeply contemplating things that he had done. He had refused to join the hunt. He knew the price of facing the Wulver. His mind wandered back to the day he made the pact with the beast, the day he traded human life for the safety of his flock. He remembered the beast's eyes, not filled with mindless rage, but with a chilling intelligence. It was not just a monster, but a creature fighting for survival, in a world where its existence was considered unnatural and evil. Angus was torn between his duty to his village and the pact he made with the Wulver itself. He had become a part of the cycle of fear and bloodshed, a cycle he desperately needed to find a way to break. But the question was how. This was quite the dilemma. The hunt continued, the men driven by a mix of fear and vengeance. They tracked the beast, following a trail of blood and destruction deeper into the wilderness. The Wulver was not a mindless beast. It was very smart and quite devious as well. It was leading them into their possible demise, a maze of shadows and silence, a terrain it knew better than any man. As they ventured further into the vast wilderness, they unfortunately discovered another body. It was not one of their own. It was a stranger, his body mutilated beyond recognition. The realization hit them like a cold wave. The Wulver was not just hunting them, it was hunting any human who dared to venture into its territory. The line between man and beast blurred. The hunters realized they were not just up against a creature of folklore, but a being that was much more human than they had imagined, a being that was fighting for its survival, just like them. The Wulver was very territorial. It's a being not to be crossed or its territory invaded, as that almost always proves to be futile. Back in the village, a sense of foreboding hung in the very air. The moon was a haunting shade of red, a blood moon, which to many, that was a bad omen in itself. The villagers huddled in their homes, praying for the safe return of their men, praying for the end of their ordeal. In his home, Angus sat with the wounded lamb, its labored breathing, a stark reminder of the devilish pact he had made. He knew what he had to do. He had to face the Wulver, but differently than previous approaches. He had to face him not as a hunter, but as a man who understood its struggle. As the blood moon rose, painting the village in a sinister hue, Angus ventured into the wilderness, his determination steeling him against the chill of fear. He was ready to face the wrath of the beast, however, whether it would work or not. He had a plan, a truce of sorts, ready to break the cycle of fear and bloodshed. But would the Wulver accept his offer of peace, or would it be the ghastly end of Angus McLoud, or even worse, the destruction of the entire village? The suspense hung in the air, as tangible as the crimson moon itself. As Angus navigated through the thick underbrush, his heart pounded so hard it felt like it was going to bust right out of his chest. The silence of the forest was interrupted by the distant howls of the Wulver, a chilling sound that made his blood run cold. A part of him wanted to just forget about it and run. Angus said to himself, "I am not a coward. This isn't just about me. This is about everyone I love." He desperately wanted to fix things, but the fear was getting much overwhelming. Despite the fear gnawing at his nerves, he pressed on, determined to face the beast. There, in a moonlit clearing, stood the Wulver, its horrendous figure illuminated by the eerie glow of the blood moon. As Angus approached, the creature turned, its haunting eyes locking onto his eyes. Besides the dark, creepy stare, the Wulver didn't lunge, nor did it growl. It simply observed, a silent acknowledgement of his presence. "Enough blood has been spilled," Angus yelled at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing in the silent night. "Can we not get along? We are not your enemies, nor do we desire to be your prey." His words hung in the air, a plea for peace in this world of violence and fear. The Wulver remained silent, its gaze never leaving Angus. But something in its demeanor had changed. The beastly aura had faded, replaced by a sense of understanding. It was as if it recognized the sincerity in Angus's words. "I offer a new pact," Angus continued, his eyes never leaving the Wulver. "No more human flesh in exchange for the safety of the flock. In return, we promise not to intrude on your land, not to hunt you." The Wulver seemed to consider his words, its eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope. After what felt like an eternity, it gave a single solemn nod. The deal was struck. A new pact was formed, one not born of fear, but of mutual respect and understanding. As dawn broke, the men returned from the hunt, their faces pale and their spirits broken. They brought with them tales of horror, of their comrades fallen, and of a beast not wholly animal but part human, which goes against some of the myths about the beast not being human at all. There was in fact a slight cross of beast and human, and even a greater intelligence than once thought. The village listened in somber silence, their joy of the men's return marred by the heavy cost of the hunt. Angus returned too, his face calm, his demeanor changed. He bore news of a new pact, a promise of peace. The villagers listened, their disbelief slowly turning into reluctant acceptance. The reign of terror was over, replaced by an uneasy truce. Word of the new pact spread through the highlands, carried by the wind and whispered among the villagers. The legend of the Wulver took on a new form, not just a tale of a beastly creature, but of a being trying to survive, of a shepherd boy who dared to challenge the cycle of fear and violence, and of a pact that changed their lives forever. As our tale draws to a close, we leave the mist-shrouded highlands, carrying with us a story of terror, courage, and understanding. The legend of the Wulver continues, a reminder that sometimes the true beasts are not those that lurk in the shadows, but the fear that resides within us. But remember, the story of the Wulver is never truly over. It continues, waiting to be retold, waiting for another fateful encounter in the remote, mystery-laden Scottish Highlands. I hate to leave you all now, but unfortunately, this is the end of today's story. One of my followers and friend had made a request for this story. I hope you all enjoyed it. If any of you have an idea of a new story to tell and would like me to give it a go and put my own spin on it, just let me know. Please don't forget to give us a like, subscribe, and or leave us a comment. As always, thank you for visiting my channel. You are all very much appreciated. Who's awesome? You are all awesome. Later, my friends.